Let's start it off. Let's start it off.
Let's do it.
With the League
of the Game
Philosophers,
Unscripted
Unedited
Video Game Podcast. Enjoy.
We just won the Trill War of I don't know who we were competing with, but
we won.
I'm pretty sure we just trilled harder than anybody on the planet for at least 2 seconds there.
And trilled where there didn't even need a trill.
Oh no. We were well past the point of any need or it was purely want territory at that point.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah.
Here we are. We've had a little bit of a break.
Yeah.
I think we meant to record a podcast when I was in town visiting. But we just got into all sorts of other stuff. We ended up recording some video footage of but was it, do you call it now Cincinnati Mills, or I still think of it as Forest
It's
Fair
called
Mall?
Cincinnati Mall, actually.
Cincinnati Mall.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Did a little tour of an arcade and we got a bunch of gaming in and stuff, but we didn't actually record a podcast, which is no big deal. And here we are now. I moved into a new lovely abode. Yeah.
What have you been playing lately?
What have I been playing lately? I have not been playing jack squat. It really hasn't been a whole lot with the move and everything. It's mostly just a little bit of Apex Legends in the evening. And, I was actually thinking about this, is that I have actually been doing aim training probably, I don't know, at least 20 minutes a day where I'm just focusing on just practicing that aim. And I was thinking about how that's kind of a unique thing to first person shooters. And like, I really enjoy doing it. Like it almost gives me that feeling of kind of being at like a carnival and like trying to shoot the little ducks, as they like pull across the line. Kind of, what was that gun con game? Point Blank.
Yeah.
Remember that one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's something about aim training that gives me that kind of vibe. Like my friend Justin hates it. He's like, it's like pulling teeth. It's like you just pulled all the fun out of the game to just boil it down to this very dry kind of practice. He's like, why?
It's like being in the lab with fighting games.
Yeah. And that was actually kind of my train of thought, is like, for FPS games, we have aim training. There's not really too much like that for like RTS games. And in fighting games, we have the lab and we can practice combos and setups and stuff like that. But there's also not really a universal like fighting game trainer, like what aim training allows you to do is to work on these very specific scenarios. And I feel like there's actually a place for that in fighting games. Like, I guess what's coming to mind is imagine there was like some sort of game, or more realistically, like some company just adds this to their training mode where you could actually practice like finding gaps in block strings and then setting up a counterattack, or doing whiff punishing. And you're just drilling one thing over and over, and really dialing it in and getting that spacing, or practicing your defense, and having an onslaught coming at you and you're just blocking the high-low game and, getting off the ground to avoid the throws and stuff like that. And it's getting closer. I feel like especially, it's funny to say, but probably Mortal Kombat 11 and trying to think of the last other good game that had a really good
Killer Instinct.
That had the
2013 Killer Instinct has a fantastic training mode that goes through a lot of those kinds of scenarios.
Yeah. Skullgirls, I think also it gets a nice really credit. That was one of the first ones.
Really deep with that.
Yeah. And those are really good, I think, for teaching you all the ins and outs of how the system works and how to think like a fighting game player. But I feel like they're just kind of a one-time thing, like rather than going back and working a scenario where you have a character and you just want to work with punishing with them. Like I've yet to actually see it really expanded to that point, or to be able to say like, hey, I really want to practice against Jago and get all of his counters. And then the computer sets up a specific mode and already knows it wants to walk you through these problematic scenarios and let you figure it out, So maybe that'll come about. But
I think that would be nice because you can do that in a lot of fighting game training modes, but you have to
To
record
record
what you
it.
need to do. And
Yeah.
for me, that's when I cut off. Like I'll spend hours in the lab practicing combos, things like that,
Yeah.
but I'll learn that kind of stuff just through actual match play
Yeah.
because setting up those scenarios and recording them and going over that, it just bores the ever loving crap out of me.
Yeah, and they're just not smooth. Like
No.
even the quickest ones, like Guilty Gear, the new one Strive, it does a pretty good job of giving you like multiple recording slots, and then
Yeah.
you can mix them up and stuff. But it's still pretty obtuse. It feels a little chunky to get around and do. I'm glad it's there, but
Sure.
yeah, it's just not quite streamlined. Anyway, yeah, so that's basically been it lately. Is just doing a lot of aim training, playing a little bit of Apex. I've been working my way through a little bit of Black Mesa.
Okay.
And just revisiting Half-Life, which has been fun.
Yeah.
I recently saw, just kind of coincidentally, some guy set this up where it's Half-Life, the original one, played in VR, and he streams the entire thing. And then he has like 6 of his friends take over characters in the game, like say the security guard or some of the doctors or whatnot. And then they take full control and they role play as the characters, and he plays through Half-Life with his friends, just jumping to other NPCs and stuff.
Oh, that's fun.
And playing along with them, and they all try to stay in character, but it gets ridiculous really quick.
Oh, that sounds great.
Yeah. So yeah, it's mostly been the kind of that stuff for me. I thought maybe I would like get into that Steel Assault game, which the more I read about it, it still looks just as cool. It's just, I don't know. I got too much other stuff going on. I will get to it though. Yeah. What about you, man? What have you been playing now that you finished up Persona?
Oh God, I finished Persona and I don't know what to do with my life anymore. Like
it's like this big thing has been just cut out of
you. for like 2.5 months, like that was my game time. It was jumping into Persona, hanging out with these, cool teenagers and learning all about Japanese culture and how hard it is to be a teenager in Japan and all the stuff that they deal with and all the expectations and things like that, but all the great society parodies and I can't say too much because I don't want to ruin anything for you because I know you still haven't beat it yet. But man, like the more you get to the end game and when you get to the depths of Mementos and you figure out like what's down there and stuff, and you're like, oh, this hits home. It's really all about how everybody is. This isn't really ruining anything. It's really all about how society in general are prisoners. And they want to be prisoners because we don't want to have our own thoughts. We would rather be told what to do and what to think rather than actually have our own justice, which is what the game is all about. All the characters have their own justice. I mean, it's brilliant. It is 100%. As a literature major, having a literature degree, this is one of the most brilliant pieces of literature I have ever read and or interacted with. That's called ludonarrative, when you get the interaction of the game play with the actual story. And Persona 5 does such an amazing job of marrying the two because all the story beats actually affect the gameplay in very tangible ways, and ways that most JRPGs and other story-driven games don't do. It's either all story or a lot of action, or you have expose and then action, but the storyline doesn't actually interact with the gameplay. And so the Persona games are really unique in that, but 5 especially, just with the vibe, the tone, the music. I've been listening to the soundtrack nonstop, even after I finished the game like 3 weeks ago, and Ryan is about to kill me. I got my fucking Ryuji shirt on.
Right. I just got the Oh My God right now.
I love the game and the universe, and it's everything I can not to like jump back in and actually do a new game plus right now. But I know I need a break. So in the meantime, I've been just playing like a bunch of like different stuff as I try to figure out like what hits. I went back and I beat Resident Evil 8, which I'm really glad that I did because the end game was much cooler. It kind of lags in pacing like right around the third boss. But after that, it picks back up and it's great. And I'm really glad I went back and beat it because Ethan's storyline gets tied up really well. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So it was really, really glad I went back and did that. And I've been just playing some other random stuff here. Illusion of Gaia on the Super NES. I've been dicking around with a little bit. And playing some arcade stuff just here and there, but I haven't really dove into anything. Although I did pick up a fantastic graphic novel series called Saga.
Yeah, so I looked it up and I shied away from it a little bit because it was like $40 for each of these like hardcover volumes, but they have it at the library. So I'm gonna try to snag it and maybe read it that way. It sounds like it made an impression on you though.
Yeah, so we were at a random comic book shop in Portland, Maine when we were there last week. And the people we were staying with highly recommended Saga. And so we were in this comic book shop and I saw the first edition of the hardbound volumes that you're talking about. And I picked it up and I was looking at it and I flipping through and I'm looking at the art and I'm like, man, the art is really cool. Like this artist is just absolutely fantastic. And I was like, you know what? Shot in the dark. I need something to play on the plane or read on the plane because I really wasn't getting into my Switch. So I got it and I read through all 400 some odd pages in 2 days.
Damn.
And it just gripped me. And
it's
so
like
I
a
immediately
sci-fi kind of thing, or
yeah,
is it
kind
more
of
fantasy,
like,
or
kind of like mixing high fantasy with space sci-fi opera kind of.
okay,
ness.
yeah.
So it's like, I don't know, taking some concepts from the Lord of the Rings to make Star Wars a much more interesting and compelling universe, which if there's anybody listening to this, it's like, oh my God, Star Wars is the best thing. Sorry, I can't get into Star Wars, but this is cool as shit. And even if you like Star Wars, you're still going to like this. It's just very well written. The story is all based around two people from two warring factions that get together and they have a kid. And these two factions are basically trying to get these two people and their kid because they don't want other people to see that, oh, well, these two different races can merge and they can procreate and it can work, you know, kind of. So it's really a story about diversity and things like that too. It's just it does what good sci-fi should do, and it uses a lot of far-fetched metaphor for what's going on in our society today in order to help us to overcome that. And I highly recommend it. I got on Amazon and I got the other 2 volumes. There's 54 total like individual comic book issues, and so the 3 volumes go through the first 54 issues. There's 108 issues planned though, and so it's really the story's only halfway done.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it's been quite a while since I've really sunk my teeth into a graphic novel. So
same. I usually don't read a whole lot of fiction. I usually read nonfiction in my adult life, and so this is like the first like book of fiction that's really grabbed me in years, and I am very impressed with it, and I'm telling everybody to read it because it's awesome.
Sweet. Saga. Yeah, I will check that out. Gives me an excuse to go to the library too.
Yeah, and the main character I think is super hot, so that's also
nice. Did you try out Persona Strikers? I know you were waiting until you finished the game to dig into that.
Yeah, I played the first hour and a half of it, and it is definitely a Muso game or a Dynasty Warriors game. But it's more focused than a Dynasty Warriors game. And there's more strategy than what's in there, but it's still like, you know, throngs of enemies and doing all this stuff. And I want to play it eventually, but I'm just like, I'm going to wait, I think, a little bit longer to get into it. Because I would love to revisit the Persona 5 universe, but not like that. I think I need to separate myself a little bit more from the main game before I can really dive into that and give it a fair shake, rather than trying to judge it the whole time on the amazing artistry that is Persona 5 Royal.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense because it's such a vastly different game.
It is. It really is. It's really cool to get back in and see the Phantom Thieves and things like that. But even like how they set up the story, it is a true sequel, but how they set up the story and everything, I'm just like, really? I don't know if that was the most creative way to get these characters back together again, but I'll take it because the characters are great and the writing is still great and stuff like that. And
Yeah,
everyone reprises their voice roles and things like that. So
that's
it's really
cool.
authentic and stuff. And it is nice playing it on PC because it's in like crispy 4K and 60 frames per second. So
Yeah,
that's kind of cool to see that.
yeah,
But at the same time, just like it still just doesn't have that shine and that magic that the turn-based games do.
right. Yeah, yeah. So, in a segue to our topic today, would you consider Persona Strikers a beat 'em up?
No, I wouldn't.
It's more of a action horde smashing game, I suppose. It certainly does have things in common, though, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it has a beat 'em up feel in some ways that you have your main little attack and it goes into a combo and stuff. But like, I was thinking about how to define beat 'em ups, and kind of where they're at, and it seems like there's like almost a fork in the road for the development of beat 'em ups, and that you had what you would maybe call like your belt scrolling style beat 'em up,
yeah.
like maybe Kung Fu and Russian Attack and maybe like Ninja Warriors, stuff like that, where there was not even like a Y axis
Mm-hmm.
to move up and down. Or I guess that would be the Z
It'd
axis.
be the
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
Z axis. And then the traditional final fight kind of setup. Because I think I consider both of those beat 'em ups. I could. It's certainly the final fight one. That's like the prototypical one. Those side scrolling ones though, like, oh man, they almost like teeter a line there because they're almost their own little platformy action game.
I think so. If I'm not mistaken, I think that entire genre, including you have a single plane beat 'em up like Ninja Warriors, and then you have a multi-plane beat 'em up like Final Fight and every permutation of
Yeah.
anything that came out after Final Fight came out, and that's all called the Belt Action Brawler. If Capcom beat 'em up collection that came out last year, a couple years ago. In
Mm-hmm.
Japan, it's called the Belt Action Brawler Collection or
Oh, okay.
whatever.
Yeah.
Like it's very specific about that. And I think those two styles of a beat 'em up are very similar because it's usually one character beating up on another character. There might be multiple characters or enemies on the screen, but you're not hitting all of those characters at once with just your main character. You have to kind of
Yeah.
like crowd control, pick one guy out, deal with him, get the guy that's coming up behind you that's trying to, pin you in and stuff like that. So you're
Yeah.
doing that in both games. It's just in your Final Fight style brawlers, you have the y-axis to play with as well. So it changes
Right.
the combo flow and the tempo a little bit, but the same basic setup's the same.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like it's essential that it's like almost entirely focused on hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah.
Like the second you start adding projectiles into it, like I think Magic Sword at a glance might look like that 2D beat 'em up, but it really is more of like a plotting shooter of sorts,
Mm-hmm.
for
That's also
just
got
how all the
platforming
weapons and stuff
elements
work.
too. It is a platformer too.
Yeah, yeah. So a little bit of overlap there,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I guess mostly what we're talking about today, though, yeah, that belt style.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I hear that belt using to describe it too, I always think of like a belt sander. And
Yeah. I
it
think of like a
makes
conveyor belt. Yeah.
yeah, it makes me wish somebody actually just made a beat 'em up that was like all took place on like conveyor belts.
I
Like,
don't know about that because then there would be like pits to fall in and shit.
yeah,
That would drive me
yeah,
insane.
right, yeah. God, those always were some of the worst parts.
Mm-hmm.
Like they always insist on it, and I get the appeal of like, okay, we need to add some sort of little pits to add variety and maybe to throw people into, but then they inevitably want you to jump over the pits.
Yeah.
And beat 'em ups just aren't built for that kind of platforming. Like I'm
Mm-mm.
thinking like Double Dragon, like the forest stage, trying to jump
Ugh.
through the little bits of the bridge,
Yeah.
and like how frustrating to lose a life instantly like that, especially
Mm-hmm.
when a big part of beat 'em ups like if you really are, you know, the game is hooking with you and you're really enjoying it, you're naturally getting better, or if you're, you know, setting out to try to one credit or something. One of the big elements of strategy is crowd control by far. That's probably, you know, your number one kind of tool for your longevity. And then all of a sudden a platform just throws all of that out the window because, you know, you didn't line up a jump right, which is silly.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So what are your, so let's kind of think about the history of the belt action brawler. Kind of starting out with Final Fight, because that's the style that we're really talking about right now. And then, so kind of thinking that era from like 1989 to, I don't know, let's say like 1999. What are your favorites or the ones that are just on the top of your head and why?
Okay, so from like Final Fight-ish, and then what, like 10 years out or something? Is that the
Let's say
range?
Final Fight to Sengoku 3 on the Neo Geo, which came out in
Something
2001.
like that?
Yeah.
I adored Final Fight. Final Fight, I think for me was this game that kind of filled in this slot for where Street Fighter 2 had absolutely like captured my imagination and then expanded on that. And I think you can even see that with like, you know, the original name of Final Fight being, what was it? Street Fighter 91, I think was the working title.
89.
89.
Street Fighter 89, yeah.
Yeah, and they're like, you could tell they almost weren't sure if they were going to stick with like, you know, the fighting game genre as they saw it as this two-player game, and maybe wanted to expand into that. And for me, I was absolutely loved the sprites. I loved the grittiness. I loved just at that point, like, you know, 2D combat in general. So, and Final Fight had so much personality. I'll add another one to the list though. The Final Fight was probably the one that really kind of hooked me and really got me playing it regularly. Ninja Gaiden in the arcade had a tremendous effect on me as well.
Really?
I remember
it's so slow.
It's super slow. It's super slow and it's awkward. If you've never seen this game before, it had a controller that had like a little thumb button on top of it in order to, I think that handled some of the more gymnastic moves. Like
they had it at Aladdin's Castle for a long time.
Yeah.
And this came on when we were growing up. Yeah.
I remember being maybe like 10 years old and they had it at the Jewel Osco like grocery store in Illinois. And I would just play that, you know. And I remember seeing the Nintendo version, and that was pretty cool. That was super awesome. I loved it. But the arcade version was all crazy. It had all this extra animation. You could jump up, hang from a bar, and spin and do this like ninja gymnastic stuff. But most importantly, when you died, it would present to you, you know, your continue screen with a countdown, and it was so grisly. Like, as far as I know, it was the first beat 'em up to do this. Later, Final Fight kind of aped it as well. But it had this giant razor blade slowly coming down on Ryu's chest, and he starts panicking, and it goes faster and faster and faster. And if you don't continue, the whole screen goes red, and he screams.
Yeah.
You know, and then later Final Fight does that with Hagar and all the other dudes having like the dynamite on their chest. One brilliant way to get a kid to throw another quarter into the machine.
Yeah.
But it created such an interesting kind of panicky sensation. And it was also just wild, you know. I was just like, holy shit. So yeah, going back and playing the game though, no, it did not age well. It's really clunky, really repetitious. There's not very good enemy variety and stuff. But probably the next big one that really got me was Streets of Rage. And Streets of Rage got me in a way that I couldn't tell why it was getting me.
One or two?
Like, probably two is the one that really did it for me. Although I played one and liked it, it was playing two that I was like, oh, god damn, this game is so cool. But looking at it, I remember my friends being like, oh, it's just like a Final Fight clone. And I was like, it kind of is. I mean, it does a lot of the same things, but like, why is it so much fun? What is keeping me coming back, you know? And that game just had the music. It had a lot more character to it. It was really lush visuals, and it just played really well. I think for me, that's where Streets of Rage stood out is that the controls felt really tight. That felt a lot more creative than Final Fight. And I felt more in control of the situation. It's always been a little bit of a pet peeve of mine where either beat 'em ups get a little too stuck in their ways, and you're just doing the same thing over and over and over. It's just repetitious, and then you get 3 stages in, and you're kind of bored. You don't even care about the rest of the game.
Yeah.
Or they just throw too much shit at you to just drain your quarters, and there's not real tools and abilities to work your way through the problems that they're presenting. And to me, that feels like a little bit undercooked in terms of game design.
Yeah.
Streets of Rage just deftly managed a balance between those two, and it never felt cheap, but it was always throwing new things at you, and felt pretty exciting mostly the whole way through. Yeah. This is going to take a while if I'm going to go all the way down the line, so let me throw it back your way. I'm going to grab some water real quick. Here, I'll be right back. And why don't you let me know what was the first beat 'em up that kind of got its hooks in you?
Probably, it sounds a little cliche, but the Turtles arcade game. Because that came out in, I think, 89.
Yeah.
And
that was like height of TMT sensation too.
Yeah. And I mean, it was such a cool approximation of the animation that, of course, we loved as a kid.
Yeah.
Because the arcade hardware that Konami used was bespoke, but it was really great because it had nice, lush animation, really great color. Things you could not recreate that at home at the time when it came out. There was just no way to do it. So going to the arcade to actually play your favorite cartoon was a total treat. And then, of course, when the NES version came out, I got it and I ate it up and I played it for dozens and dozens and dozens of hours. And I mastered the game playing it by myself, which is not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
And even though it's as simple as a beat 'em up can possibly get, it's still a great time. And that's what really got me into beat 'em ups and to notice like what that genre is. And I mean, God, to this day, I have the arcade board for the original Turtles, and I have my Super NES version of Turtles in Time because I prefer that, but I'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
And then when Final Fight came out, I remember discovering it at the arcade. It was at the local Aladdin's Castle, which is where I, usually haunted. And to this day, even then, and to this day, I do not like Final Fight. I don't like it. And I've never been able to really pinpoint why. And it might be, especially nowadays, I think, well, maybe it's because everyone's like, oh my God, Final Fight's like the best thing on the planet. It's the best beat 'em up that came out and blah, blah, blah. And the Sega CD version's great because music and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And I play it and I'm just like, this is so boring. Everybody has one combo. Right. There's not a lot of resets you can do. There's no interesting grapples you can do. It's just walking along. And if you really want to break the game, you can do that punch, turn, which I think is silly. I mean, honestly, I still to this day, I don't know why people like Final Fight so much. I just think it's dull. I think it's a nice, tight game. I think it feels good and it's not a bad game or anything. And I kind of get like, it doesn't have that squishy feel like the Konami beat 'em ups had, where it's like, whoa, what is this hit detection? Is there hit detection in this game? I don't know, but it's a cartoon. But it was I don't know, this is a cartoon that was much more appealing to me when I was, 10, 11 years old than the gritty art style and, super precise hit detection of Final Fight, which of course, when Street Fighter II came out, I came to like that really precise action much better. Yeah. But around that time is when I played Streets of Rage 2 in 1991. And when I played Streets of Rage 2, it was a revelation because it had all of the, tight responsive control of Final Fight or Street Fighter 2, but it had really interesting characters. It had really lush animation, even compared to the arcade version of Final Fight. Yeah. It had 4 different characters to use, and all of those characters had 3 different special moves they could use. They had 2 or 3 different types of throws. You could escape throws. You could do combo resets.
Right. You had back attack.
Right. You had all of these different options and really interesting locales, and on top of one of the best video game soundtracks I've ever heard in my life. So whereas the Konami games showed me what a beat 'em up is and how much fun they can be from one aspect of that, Streets of Rage 2 was the whole package.
Yeah.
And it after I played that, it was what I judged every other beat 'em up to be and what it should be. So honestly, like even all the Capcom beat 'em ups that came out after that, your Dungeons and Dragons, those two, Alien versus Predator, all that, I'm just like, this is not Streets of Rage 2.
You know, and that's interesting too, because I used to be a really big fan of the Aliens versus Predator game from also playing it in Aladdin's Castle and really enjoying that. And like, I did come into it with a little bit of bias because I was a really big like Alien fan. I just love those movies and love the Predator movies as well. So seeing those kind of come together with that, you know, kind of patented Capcom art style. And what really got me is it felt like, oh, okay, they're doing something kind of new here. And they would like, you know, had a special move each for the players that you could do. The jumps were more pronounced. They were actually more Konami-like. And they had these like angled dive kicks and whatnot. And you had a dedicated button for using like, you know, your little homing shot attack, which was really cool. And what I realized is that I fell in love with that game by playing it simply one quarter and walking away. Like I would sit down and be like, oh, very, very cool. I was into it and stuff. But when I went back and revisited it, probably like 6 months ago when we were talking about beat 'em ups and kind of getting on a kick on it, I played through the entire game and I was just like, this game is beautiful, but it is super underbaked. The enemy variety sucks. Everything pretty much just plays the same. The bosses are really quite uninspired. They all feel really similar. It's just not designed as a really eloquent total package. It's just simply them kind of churning quarters one stage at a time. And a lot of like that kind of joy I had for it just kind of disappeared. It was surprising how quickly my fun with the game got tempered. But it reflects back on a game like Streets of Rage 2, which I went back also just recently, a few months ago, to play it. And found myself just going back every afternoon and picking up and playing and getting a little bit further and finding all these little details and different ways to deal with the scenarios and appreciating the different enemy variety that was thrown at me. It's just so much more well made. And then the game got a lot of credit when it first came out, but I feel like it's like later on that people really started respecting that game.
Yeah. I was there was a discussion on the NeoGeo.com forums a while ago, and you know, I think like the thread was, you know, what are your favorite Neo Geo beat 'em ups? Of which there really are no great ones. Sengoku 2 is probably the only standout that was just fucking weird and different enough that it stood
had
out.
Some interesting elements.
Yeah, I mean, and there's some that I like Robo Army's fun, Mutation Nation is fun. And Sengoku 2, those are actually the only three that are in my collection because they're the only ones that are actually playable and nice. Yeah. But anyway, you know, somebody had mentioned Streets of Rage 2, and a couple people jumped on his case, and they're like, well, that was a console beat 'em up, and these are arcade beat 'em ups, and you got to think of them in a different way. No, you don't. No, you don't.
I don't know why you should.
You really don't. Just because something was made for a console and not to munch your quarters doesn't mean that Streets of Rage 2, when you first picked it up, is a balls to the wall hard game. And you go through your credits really quick and you only get 3 of them rather than like, you know, the normal 4 like you get with a Neo Geo game. It's a hard game. It's just, it's better made than anything that SNK put out, bar none. It doesn't matter if it's an arcade or not. And because you had the Neo Geo AES, you could get those at home. And if I'm going to pay $60 for Streets of Rage 2 or $200 for Sengoku 1, which is a steaming pile of crap, where are you going to feel like you're getting your money's worth? And they were made not a year apart from each other. So there's just a huge quality difference from what you were seeing in Streets of Rage 2. And even then, like you didn't have a whole lot of contemporaries on console that could compete with the finesse of that game either. And
Right.
I feel like I'm trying to sell the game to people right now because it's just so good. Um, but what was the other? Oh yeah, Turtles in Time was another one that really hit home. Not the arcade version. The arcade version was great, squishy cartoon fun, but because the home version could not replicate what the arcade version did with having like 7 enemies on the screen at one time and things like that, rather than trying to really recreate the arcade experience, Konami went through and they fine-tuned everything about the games where it looks like a nice approximation of the arcade game. It looks good. The Super NES version does. Actually, that's really the only home version of it. But the hit detection, they tightened up the hit detection. The hit boxes are much more easy to tell when they are. There's only 3 enemies on the screen at once, so there's not a lot to deal with. It started to feel a little bit more like Streets of Rage 2 because it was a much tighter experience.
Yeah.
And it was easier to crowd control. It felt much better to play. And there was all these small nuances. Once you started to play it more, you found all these nuances and like different style of jump kicks. So if you press jump attack, you did like this little hop attack. If you hold down jump and then like an apex jump, and at the apex, then you press attack, then there's another attack. So there were like different ways that you could attack different enemies in the game depending on what the situation was. Not fully as featured as say like Streets of Rage 2, but I ended up liking the Super NES version of Turtles in Time probably as much as Streets of Rage 2 because it was just a really well-tuned, finely crafted arcade port that at the end of the day, felt better than the arcade, which I know is not a popular opinion. And people that have nostalgia for that game are like, oh, the arcade version, because it was the arcade version and it's a cartoon. Okay, yeah. But if I'm going to play the game and actually want to play the game, I'm going to play the Super NES version because it's, I mean, I don't even know if subjectively it's a better game. Like, it is just a better crafted experience if you're not looking for squishy cartoon fun.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that makes me think of like some of the beat 'em ups that started kind of mixing things up because much like 2D fighters, once game publishers, especially like third-party developers, got a whiff of, oh, okay, people are into these, there was a lot of just crap that was churned out. Totally forgettable beat 'em ups that they're not worth the time of the day. You can just totally trash them and never think about them again. But where some of them started to stand out was when they started innovating. And for me, one of the biggest ones that kind of innovated on this was River City Ransom. And that brought in RPG elements. It had a cute visual style that worked really well with the NES.
It was the Kunio-kun visual style that Taito made. Yeah.
And it had like multiple branching paths. You would explore this early version of what we would now probably describe as something kind of open world. And that, you could walk all the way back to the original starting area if you wanted to. You could shop and buy books to read and then get new moves. And then, of course, there's the great scene towards the end where you fight the Dragon Twins and it starts playing the Double Dragon music, which was so dope. Those games were so awesome, and it bucked the trend of, you put in your quarter and you play up to a point and then the game's kind of over and resets. Now you had progression that was going with it. And I think in some ways, I actually like a beat 'em up that doesn't do that, where I just play it in one fell swoop, but you can make it work as well. And for me, River City Ransom was one of those that really stood out. I remember I wasn't a kid that had an NES like day one. I was still sitting with my Atari 7800 for quite a while. And as a compromise, my parents would let me rent a Nintendo. And that was one of the games I remember renting. And one of those first weekends was River City Ransom. And I remember Contra. And I think the original maybe Castlevania or something, which was a great way to get introduced to the NES. But that game continued to be one of my all-time favorites for such a long time. And it
Mm-hmm.
was really, really fun. And it created these very comical kind of interactive moments that I think a lot of people don't give it credit for. For instance, like it introduced a run, and you could do silly things if you weren't paying attention. You run right into a wall,
Right.
and your guy would fall down, and it had voice lines where your guy would be like, barf, as some coins flew out of him and whatnot.
Yeah. Barf.
But you could like pick up your friend and carry him, or pick up
Mm-hmm.
an enemy and carry them and use them to bat people. You could throw like a tire, bounce it off of a wall, jump on the tire, and
Yep.
start doing a little running dance, before you jumped back off. There was
Mm-hmm.
lots of just funny, cool, interactive stuff that was way ahead of its time.
Yeah.
And they continue to kind of build around it, and then those games have now bred like rabbits. There's so many different ones that they just tried different things and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But especially that original, man, that one was a big important one for me. Can you remember what was the first beat 'em up that like did something particularly innovative that stood out for you?
I think overall in the genre, Taito's Renegade, or whatever it was called in Japan, the original Kunio-kun game
Yeah,
that River City
yeah.
Ransom is based on and
Right.
stuff
It
like
was a
that.
bit darker, edgier, had some really cool animation.
Yeah, yeah, that was a precursor to really any
All of
belt
them,
action
right?
game. Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
then Double Dragon was the next year, kind of expanded upon that. You got River City Ransom at Home, but anyway, um, I really did enjoy during the Super NES days. I never got a chance to play it in the arcade at the time, but the some of the other CPS1 Capcom brawlers, the CPS2 Capcom brawlers didn't really do much for me, but the
Hmm.
CPS1, especially Knights of the Round and King of the Dragons,
Those are so
are
cool.
both
Yeah.
fantastic. I really like the setting. I really like what you can do. They're much more interesting and fully featured than Final Fight. They have the same, good snappy control and gritty graphics, but much more options and
Yeah.
what you can do, and some small RPG elements that not as interactive as say something like River City Ransom, because they're arcade games, but have a whole experience system. You gain new moves, new armor types, more power, things like that. The more enemies you defeat, so it really praises good gameplay rather than just giving you score for extra lives. There's some
Yeah.
really tangible bonuses and benefits, and that really grabbed me. And I played the crap out of those on Super Nintendo when I was a kid. Nowadays they have the arcade boards, but they're both still great games. I still play Knights of the Round a lot. I love Knights of the Round.
Yeah, and those games were probably like kind of the grandfathers of what would later become the D&D games that Capcom made. I
Yeah.
remember originally playing the first D&D game over at the Qzar laser tag that was down Beachmont Avenue from
Mm-hmm.
us. And I remember thinking that game was really stood out. One, I was a D&D nerd. I got into like second edition, and like had all the monstrous manuals
Yeah.
and everything. So seeing this game that had it was set in the D&D world, but it actually adhered to some of the D&D rules, which I
Mm-hmm.
thought was especially cool because it introduced all of a sudden like an inventory and whatnot. And like if you knew that in D&D's world that trolls would regenerate but were weak to fire, you
Mm-hmm.
would know that you can take the oil and like throw it on the trolls and they would deal like double
Yeah.
damage or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
All of that kind of stuff was like, embedded in the game, which I thought was really fantastic. And it was probably one of the first to start adding more combat options that were really interesting. It wasn't the first, no, I take that back, but I just think it did a pretty good job with it because for me, once I started really getting into just traditional fighting games, my interest in beat 'em ups almost totally disappeared. Like fighting games represented
Same.
this like so much more interesting kind of conversation you could have with another human being and blah
Mm-hmm.
blah 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 blah, and they were so much more in depth and so much more going on. And then all of a sudden, beat 'em ups felt like just plain donuts. I was just like, okay, yeah, they're fun, but I'm just not into them.
Right.
And then I always wanted there to be more fighting game qualities and beat 'em ups. And I remember the D&D games all of a sudden allowing you to hold the button to block. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you had the dash attacks. I think a couple of them introduced like the DP motion, or maybe like a flash kick kind of thing to get special moves. You had spells that you would use. You had an inventory system that was a bit clunky, but it kind of worked and it was kind of cool. And you had these really giant sprites that were doing some pretty cool stuff. And yeah, that pushed it a bit further, but it was still firmly an arcade game. It really stood out. That was another one going back to them. They're still pretty fun to play. Maybe not quite as fun as I remember. I still enjoyed them. I just thought I was gonna really get into diving back and playing them again, but it turned out that a couple playthroughs and I was kind of done and ready to move on. Yeah.
There's so of course you have the Sega Beatem Ups as well that I don't think get a lot of love in the modern day.
Are you thinking like Golden Axe and things like that? Yeah.
And even Arabian Nights, which is really freaking strange. If you never played that before, look that up.
Arabian Nights. No, actually,
it uses the Sega System 32 board to make the sprites scale in and out as they go in and out of the Y-axis. It looks really strange. It's kind of cool looking. It doesn't play all that great, but look up some videos. It's nuts.
Okay, I'll give that a look.
But of course, I played Golden Axe actually a lot when I was a kid. My dad really liked Golden Axe, so we would play it when he would go to take me to Aladdin's Castle. He would play that with me some, as well as this freaking Simpsons arcade game. He really liked that.
Oh, right, yeah.
But he liked Golden Axe so much that when the PC version came out, he got it. We had maybe, I think it was a 386 at the time, 386 processor, and that thing just chugged. And it was that awful PC sound because we didn't have a sound card. So it was that PC speaker. It was just the most awful experience. He would just play that and it would just make the worst sounds. But this year was the first time that I played the actual true sequel, the Revenge of Death Adder.
Yeah, that was a Saturn release or an arcade release?
It never got a home release. It was only in the arcade.
Yeah.
And it should have been on the Saturn. There's no reason it couldn't have been on the Saturn. The Saturn would have been able to handle it just fine. The Saturn got that double or Golden Axe fighting game, which is horrible. That's not horrible. It's really vanilla.
Like yeah.
But yeah, the Revenge of Death Adder. If you have not played that yet, play it. It is one of those really good feeling. It's kind of like Streets of Rage 2. It's just a really good feeling game that has a lot of variety. The animation is fantastic. The magic spells are really cool. There's this one spell that you do if you're like the barbarian dude, where it lights a screen on fire, and if it kills one of the enemies, there's this enemy, like this screen size enemy head that pops up, and you watch the skin melt off of them, and all you see is their bones left over. It's really grisly. But it's fantastic, and it just has great presentation, good music, good animation, great hit detection, plenty of options and moves, and it's Golden Axe on steroids. Like once you play it, you're like, oh, there's the original Golden Axe. That's nice, but this is a much better time. Cool. It's great. Yeah, highly recommend that.
I remember seeing it. You know, I kind of have a vague memory of reading like an EGM like back in the day and them talking about like this arcade new Golden Axe. I think it was like 3 players, and I think they introduced some woman that now had this like kind of almost American Gladiator
the
style,
centaur woman with like the
that's what it was. Yeah, so I have this in my head, but I don't think I actually played it. So
when you were over at my house, we didn't actually play it, but I had that arcade 1-up cab that is the Revenge of Death Adder. Yeah.
Oh man,
that's the first time I played it.
Yeah. Well, I'll be back for the holidays, so let's put a note in that one. Yeah, and we'll go back and play that one. Yeah. And you know, some of the other ones that kind of stood out to me, Son Goku 3 is another one that I think revisiting it, you're like, oh, this game just actually wasn't like really well designed front to end. But what I liked about it is that it introduced more fighting game mechanics, and it actually had like nice, fun, juggly combos that you could do and you could work your way through, which again was something I always wanted. Yeah. And getting up to slightly more modern, I guess at this point is probably like 15 years ago. But I don't know if you ever played it. Scott Pilgrim
Yeah, of course.
Saves the World. Yeah, that game was basically for me like a spiritual rebirth of River City Ransom.
Oh, 100%. It was
It
River
hit
City
on
Ransom.
so many of those notes. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
had a really good time playing that game. It was
Yeah,
filled
same.
with just all sorts of interesting, neat stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was able to strike that balance between being easy to pick up, fun to play, full of different character variety, along with modern game sensibilities. Like it could throw some really fun, weird kind of bonus stages at you, and have branching elements as well as like
Mm-hmm.
progression. Yeah, but all still firmly in that, tap that button and beat the crap out of the enemies on the screen kind of feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. There was another game that team did. Oh yeah. On the Game Boy Advance, they did the TMNT game,
Right.
the
You were
Turtles
telling
game
me about that. I
that
still
went
haven't
along with
tried
that
it.
movie. Yeah, from
Yeah.
2007, which actually wasn't a terrible Turtles movie. But yeah, it's really good. Very similar art style and pacing and hit detection
Yeah.
as Scott Pilgrim. Yeah, really, really interesting little beat 'em up that nobody mentions.
Yeah.
And it's kind of been lost to time, but I actually have a cart of it because I like it so much.
Nice.
It's not perfect, and it's, not say as deep as, like, say, Scott Pilgrim, but
Yeah.
it is a really, really good beat 'em up. And I'm looking forward to the new Turtles beat 'em up that's coming out. That looks fun.
Right. It
2v1.
does. Yeah. So is that the same team who did Scott Pilgrim and that game who's making this new one?
I'm not sure, but it looks great.
Yeah, I saw some of the new animations for like April O'Neil, and somebody showing a
Aping
comparison.
Chun-Li and
Yeah,
Karen
yeah,
from Street Fighter. Yeah.
yeah. And people, I think the video kind of made it sound like oh, they're ripping it off,
Oh,
and
whatever.
like
It's a homage.
yeah, to me, this is like if you know where this came from and you recognized it, it's probably going to warm your heart more than piss you
Exactly.
off. Certainly was for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, that one looks like it's going to be nice and sturdy and put together pretty well all the way through.
Yeah.
Another one that I think should get a nice little bit of acclaim was Castle Crashers.
Ryan and I played through that probably 4 or 5 years ago, but yeah,
I played through
great.
that with my sister, and super freaking good. Nice sense of humor, a cool mix between stages, and it'll throw some new stuff at you. Really cool little progression. Super just well done, well polished all the way through. Really neat little game.
Yeah.
I'm actually a little surprised that we didn't see more of that, because that game did sell a lot and it got a lot of attention. I remember even seeing like little Castle Crasher plushie dolls and stuff like that. But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, they never did do a sequel, did they? That team, they ended up making a weird kind of 2D platformer where you were like in this game show, and you were working your way through stages.
I forget what it's called.
Something Battle Theater, something like that. And then I think there was another game that I'm probably forgetting.
Before that was Alien Hominid.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. See, it almost seems like that team was interested in just trying different genres. Like with Alien Hominid, it was more of a Metal Slug, Contra kind of approach. And then Castle Crashers, and then so forth. Just for my own want, I would love for them to return to the beat 'em up genre, though, because I feel like they just nailed that so well.
Castle
Doesn't even
Crashers
need to
is
be
a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, whatever they do, but I would just love to see what they come up with if they were to do another beat 'em up.
So we've been talking a whole lot about Streets of Rage, and I think that's interesting because Streets of Rage 4 came out last year. We both played it. We both bounced right off it. We both tried to play it together, also bounced right off it. But everyone thinks it's amazing. What is it about it that made us bounce off it?
It's a good question. I think for me, it definitely was not the right time to get into the game. I think I just was more interested in working on some other games at the time, because there just was that feeling of like, oh, I want to love you, but my heart only has so much room. But seeing it in motion and actually like playing it, God, it sure did look good. And it felt pretty all right, but I felt, I think it's probably, unpopular opinion, but it felt a little soulless. It felt like it was missing some of the charm of the Streets of Rage games. Because I played it a couple of times and I ended up returning it, and maybe I'll pick it up on a sale, but I couldn't believe how unenthusiastic I was about the game.
Yeah,
And
same.
if I were to look at the bullet points of what the game presents, I think I'm pretty down with everything that's being put on the table, but it just didn't come together. Yeah. I think it really came down to like maybe it was lacking a charm, some of that je ne sais quoi that we might be getting at when we say something doesn't really like have that soul to it or whatnot. But
Yeah.
yeah, it just felt a little odd. I do want to revisit it because I do feel like I'm missing some of what it has to offer me.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I sure did bounce off of it. Yeah. What about you? What kind of turned you off?
Kind of the same thing. So in a prior episode, we were talking about the Metroid 2 remakes.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
the Samus Returns, the official one on the 3DS, and the fan made AM2R. And I played AM2R before Samus Returns, and that ruined my experience with Samus Returns.
Hmm.
And then the same thing happened with Streets of Rage. So there's the fan game Streets of Rage Remake, which I just introduced to you the other day, and we both had a
Yeah,
fantastic time playing
it
it.
was. It was so much fun. Yeah.
Right. And after playing that and then playing Streets of Rage 4, and everyone's like, oh my God, Streets of Rage 4 is the best thing since sliced bread. And I'm like, not really.
Yeah.
It feels kind of stiff and slow. And again, it just doesn't have that je ne sais quoi, that the amazing passion that this fan community put into Streets of Rage Remake, which uses the an approximation of the original sprite-based graphics. It was built from the ground up. It's not a ROM hack. It's not an emulator of anything. It's built from the ground up from I don't know what engine they used, but
Yeah. But it feels like Streets of Rage.
but it feels like Streets of
yeah.
Rage, and it looks like Streets of Rage. But then it adds all these like cool little touches, like all these cool little reflection things in the background and windows. And it, of course, it uses more color than what was available on the Genesis, but not so much more that it looks crazy. And if you could say it was like something, it's a lot like Sonic Mania, where I mean, Sonic Mania may have been an official Sega commission, but it was built by fans of the game, not built by Sonic Team. And Streets of Rage Remake feels like Streets of Rage's Sonic Mania. It pulls everything that made the originals good. It uses all the original stages, but then adds all these other branching stages, all these other branching paths, all these different routes you can take. So there's just tons of variety, tons of replayability. The move set has been expanded and doing really cool stuff with that. There's just all sorts of different options and all that stuff where it's like I'm playing Streets of Rage 4 and I'm like, okay, this looks like Third Strike in Streets of Rage. So nice, pretty sprite-based graphics with lots and lots of animation.
Yeah,
but that's where all the money went.
Yeah.
And I'm like, as far as game feel goes, and I know game feel is a subjective, nebulous thing, but as far as game feel goes, to your point, Streets of Rage 4 just felt kind of soulless to me.
Yeah, just didn't have that charm. Although I think we should at some point revisit it because I've heard they've added a lot more to the game and that it's gotten a lot more fleshed out.
As long as you can make the characters run. Why? Yeah. Come on. Why would you make a beat 'em up where you have a really slow plotting pace in 2020, 2021 where you don't have a run option? That really turned me off for some reason.
Yeah. I think the other one that we started playing that I'd like to spend more time is that Fight and Rage.
Yeah, that was actually a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. And that hits on, again, some of those things that really make me light up when it comes to beat 'em ups, and that it had special moves that were built in. It had these cool juggles. It felt very creative and that you could just kind of read the situation. And especially as you get better, you could probably start stringing together kind of a custom little combination in order to best take care of the enemies on the screen. I loved that it encouraged you to use special moves by having a meter that would just fill up. And then you still have your more desperation move to eat meter, which that Streets of Rage remake does the same, right? Yeah. Which I think that's a really good idea in a beat 'em up. I think that works really well.
I think Fight and Rage probably aped it from Streets of Rage Remake because I mean that was
good chance.
Over a decade ago where they were doing that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Then, and it introduced a parry, which I think actually works in a beat 'em up really well. One of the more frustrating things to me in a beat 'em up is where you're just hit by something where you're in the middle of some scuffle over here and you see something coming at you, but you're locked into your movement and you can't do anything about it. or there's just no block. You know, you're just like, crap, I'm standing in the wrong place and I can't dodge this. But I'm still there if I only had a defensive mechanic to get me out of this. And there's your
Yeah.
parry,
Yeah.
which I think fits really well. And Fight and Rage introduces that. We only sat down and played through it the one time. We made it to like the fourth stage or something. But yeah, I'd like to go back
Yeah.
to that. I will say that the game is garish though. It's like a neon painting that kind of melted on your screen, which,
Yeah.
take it or leave it. It sure is a distinctive look. I feel like it's gonna kind of wear on me after a while, but the gameplay sure feels good. Yeah. So we're kind of getting into the more modern beat 'em ups, which brings me to a question that I've been thinking about lately: is what do you want out of a modern beat 'em up? Where do you think like the genre would best go? Is there any new directions that you like to see the gameplay being taken, or maybe it's in a different, more world building story, narrative, something else? Like, what would you love in a new beat 'em up that really got your attention?
Give me just a second. I had to text my partner back. You want to know what's going on for dinner? Man, I don't know. Like, I don't play as many beat 'em ups, of course, as I used to. And I mean, one, if I'm going to want to scratch that kind of itch, I'm probably going to play a fighting game.
Yeah.
But I don't know, just keep churning out Streets of Rage 2 clones. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, that game really has everything that I like about a game. And a Streets of Rage remake, honestly, is probably the beat 'em up that I go back to most often.
Yeah.
Because it takes everything I like about Streets of Rage 2 and kicks it up to like 20. It is just everything I want out of a modern beat 'em up. It has lots of options. It has a level editor if you want to create your own levels. It has lots and lots of moves. It has lots and lots of characters. It has lots and lots of unlockables. There's no DLC crap. There's no monetization because I mean it's a free fan made game. It feels great to play. It has a lot of heart and a lot of soul because you can tell the people that made it just dug in and love what Streets of Rage is and did everything they could to recreate that feeling and recreate that engine and recreate the crunchiness of the hits and everything. I mean, stuff. And you can even customize the game down to using the type of combo system from Streets of Rage 3 or Streets of Rage 2, which changes the way you approach the game and approach each enemy. So there's so much variety there, and you're not going to get that in a actual modern release, like say on Steam or any console, because they're going to prioritize one thing over another. And this game has been worked on for decades, and it's still being worked on. So you're not going to get that experience, but when it comes down to it, the gold standard for me, like that is really what hits that sweet spot, is that level of, well, I want to change things up this way, or I want to tweak this parameter, or I want to go through this route rather than playing through the route from, one of the other things. There's just so much there that it keeps you coming back, because every time you go back, you can do something a little different.
That's cool. Yeah, that's that freshness. Yeah. That makes me want to play more of it. Yeah, and that also makes me think maybe we should record some of our playthroughs on that.
Yeah,
we haven't actually started doing that, and that's a fun kind of chatty game because we're usually talking the entire time that we're playing. I'll tell you my take on this. Here's what we're probably going to see and what I don't want.
Okay,
somebody's going to make a roguelike beat 'em up. It's just going to happen. If I'm sure there's already something out there.
How do you do a roguelike beat 'em up? Like what? The backgrounds like change color every time? Like
here's what you do. You have your beat 'em up, and it starts really basic, and you just have your little 3-punch combo, and it's specifically limited so that you feel like you can't do jack squat, and it's really lame. And then as you play through, you get some random little bonus, and it'll let you like jump. It'll maybe give you the jump kick, or maybe it'll add a fourth attack onto your combo. And inevitably, it's all procedurally generated. The stages are just, a random background with some random characters, and then you die. And then the next playthrough, maybe that new power up is more likely to happen, and you'll get a new one. And then the more you play it, eventually your guy is stacked enough that you can weasel your way to the end, and you'll fight an uninspired final boss. And after 60 playthroughs, you'll get to see the ending. I do not want that. No.
You just described Hades pretty much.
Yeah. I'll okay. That's a whole nother topic. I give Hades some credit. I got pretty into it. I couldn't finish it. I have a hard time stomaching roguelikes for that long.
Yeah, same.
But that's part of the problem with roguelikes in general, is the lack of actual level design and like a really thoughtfully crafted kind of setup with enemy placement. I love that. It goes so far with me.
Yeah,
it creates a conversation between me and the game designer, and is a very special thing to me. It's damn near sacred. And roguelites generally throw that out the window. And I get that they're fun for different reasons. That's cool. That's not what this episode's about.
Right.
That's probably what we're going to see, though. And I'm going to see it, and I'm going to be like, Mike, it finally happened. I am so mad. And I'm just going to vent to you to keep my internet rage from spilling out into the forums.
Right.
Whereas what I would love to see is a beat 'em up that doubles down on the co-op side. You see, from playing so many fighting games, as much as I love them, they are always competitive in nature. And one of the fun things about a beat 'em up is that it scratches a bit of that fighting game itch, but you get to play it cooperatively with somebody. I would love to see a developer that sticks with really good fundamental design philosophy, enemy placement, the actual overall arching design of the game, and nails that, and then doubles down on the co-op elements. Allow more timing and communication between me and my friends, so that the more we work together and create synergy, it pays off directly into the gameplay, that we become more powerful. We have more team up attacks. We're able to do more level clearing or crowd control kind of stuff, but specifically comes from thoughtful, communicated, strategic co-op. I think that would be cool.
You should watch some videos of the dramatic battle mode in Street Fighter Alpha 3, where both people are in the custom combo-ism.
Oh,
and
yeah.
they pin in the CPU thing, and they both activate their custom combo on both sides. Just bam, 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 bam. And it's really cool. Yeah. It's really satisfying to watch. I would love to see that kind of thing in a modern style beat 'em up, where there was just this really cool coordinated to how you can team up, and maybe even like don't litter the screen with dozens of enemies, and make it just hard enough, but also don't make it unfair to where you can set up cool things like that. Because if there's one thing that I really like about a well-designed co-op game, is that as you communicate with the other player, you're like, hey, let's try this pincer attack, blah, 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 blah. All right, cool. Let's try this out. But if you have and the AI would have to be tuned pretty finely for this to happen. But I don't want, say the AI to be like, come in and they also try to do you, and you've got all these other parameters to deal with and making it a little bit more crowd control-y. That's really hard to describe or figure out how they would make that happen. But stuff like that, I think would be kind of cool if we could figure that out and take that to the next level. Yeah,
I would love to see that, because it already happens rather emergently. And now it's just a matter of recognizing it and developing around that. For instance, there's times where you might hit somebody a couple of times and then realize that okay, you need to clear the right side so you have nobody pincering you. So you grab the guy and you throw him to the left. Now, if I recognize you're going to throw him, or you communicate it, and I attack the guy that got thrown in the left with a juggle, maybe that opens up, like I start to glow and that gives me a new air combo that I can go from. And if you play off of that, then you can jump and spike them into the ground, you know. Or if a boss is charging you and you do like a spot dodge or something, it causes the boss to stumble, and alone that maybe allows you to reposition. But in a 2-player game, maybe I can take advantage and do a special kind of animation off of the stumble, you know, go into like a trip takedown or something. That kind of stuff I think would be real cool.
Or even something like, say, throw an enemy up in the air and the other character can jump up in the air and do an Izuna drop or something, you know. Stuff like that, where you could actually play off of each other and there would be some actual ways to work together in that scenario.
Yeah. Or if, you know, I'm getting beaten down and you know that, you know, like, oh crap, like Christian didn't get out of trouble, he's packed in the corner, there's some special way that you could come in and get my butt out of trouble. Like maybe you literally jump in, wall jump, grab my hand and pull me out. I don't know what it would look like, but you know, more thoughtfulness around that I think would be wonderful.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, listen, my friend, I think we've hit another hour, but it sure feels good to be back in the podcasting chair and talking games with my BFF.
Yeah, dude.
So yeah, I guess that about wraps it up for this episode. Who knows what our next topic will be, but I'm sure we'll be back at it sooner than later.
I got a good idea for next topic.
Oh yeah,
and because it's on video, this is what people can expect. Let's talk about Mega Man.
Ooh, yeah, we haven't done a Mega Man episode. Yeah, that'll be fun.
Yeah,
I'm into
Mega
that.
Man.
Yeah.
All right, sweet.
It gives me an excuse to bust out some Mega Man games and re-jog my memory and get thinking on it, which is probably one of my more favorite parts about doing these podcasts. Well, sweet, man. Been awesome. Let's play some more Streets of Rage in the future.
Yeah, let's do it. We'll do it this week.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Later, dude.
Adios.
Bye, everybody.